Hello. We're recording.
Yay. Well,
I just
friends.
knocked the shit out of my mic.
What a way to start. What a way to start for this book specifically.
We're off to a great start.
Incredible. Well, hello and welcome to Lucy and Angel's Midnight Book Club. We're your hosts, Lucy.
I'm Angel. Hello.
Hello. And this month we're discussing Summer Suns by Lee Mandelo. This book was a trip. It took me places I didn't think I was gonna go, but we went there. We did. And, you know, this book is advertised as a Southern Gothic kind of tale, which I appreciate as a bitch from the South. That's my vibe. And it ended up taking a turn, like, different than I expected it to be. Much different than I expected it to be. The summary of it is our main character Andrew was really, really close with a childhood best friend named Eddie. And they had like a bond deeper than anything until Eddie dipped out to go to college back home in Nashville, where they're from. And then one day Eddie winds up dead.
Yeah.
And they believe it to be self-inflicted. I will say there are some discussions in this book of self-inflicted wounds and things of that sort. So if that's not your vibe or is triggering for you, maybe pass on this one. But Andrew doesn't believe that this death was self-inflicted. He believes there's foul play at hand. And so Andrew goes to Eddie's college to see what the fuck is going on, really. And he meets a lot of Eddie's friends up there, his roommate, along with some ghosts. It's quite a journey we go upon in this book. And he uncovers all of Eddie's secrets that he had been keeping, all of the lies he had been telling, and all that kind of mess. It's very messy, real messy. And it's interesting that this book is genuinely a book about grief. First and foremost, it's about grief and the fucking shit it puts you through, and kind of the way it can make you an asshole.
That part, like, there's something like there's like a like the weird like frenzy almost that Andrew has, and like these weird like highs and lows that he goes through in regards to his grief are very interesting.
Andrew's going through it. Andrew is going through it. Andrew also has a little bit of Rockstar brains, but we'll get there.
Right.
We'll get there. In fact, you know what? Everybody in this book has Rockstar brains, except for a singular character. That's it. But this book is a story about grief and also coming to terms with who you are and your sexuality and who you love. And that's all wrapped up in a really spooky Southern Gothic tale, which is very interesting to me. I found that to be quite a way to turn that tale. Very interesting. Lee Mandelo, this is his first book. And I think as an author, he's got a lot of potential. Personally, for me, I think he could trim down on the way he writes. I think he is very verbose, as we put it, while discussing this book, while reading it.
He sure talks a lot.
He sure do be talking. Like, about stuff that probably we don't even need to acknowledge, like random little things going on in like the world, you know. maybe we don't need to acknowledge the kind of the way that his cereal got soggy. You know, maybe we don't need to acknowledge that whilst dealing with all what we're dealing with.
I think also
Um,
even in places where like he's talking about something plot relevant or like important, the there's like an overuse of flowery language sometimes that makes it kind of hard to really get like a picture of what's happening or like why
yeah,
this is important or Andrew's feelings on it because it's all surrounded by this very like flowery language and like it's being extended more than maybe it should be when it should be told in a more straightforward way.
that part. Like all, like I said, there's ghosts involved here, and the scenes with the ghostly things that go on are really hard to picture because of the kind of like flowery language used. It's very funky, and he doesn't call them ghosts. He calls them hauntings and revenants, and that feels very The Walking Dead core to me. You know how they never call them zombies; it's always something else.
I will not
Uh,
lie. I had a very hard time with him calling them revenants because for the crowd, I just finished watching the entirety of a show called Winona Earp, which is like it's a very like supernatural-esque show, but like the demons they're hunting, she calls them revenants. So every time he would call them that, all I could think about was Winona Earp, and I was like, man, call them something else, please. But
Anything else, King?
I agree, it is interesting that they are never, as far as I'm aware, I don't even know if he uses the word ghost in the book at all.
I don't know if Andrew uses it. The people around him might use it when they're talking about it, but I don't believe Andrew does. If he does, it is like maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
It's unmemorable. I cannot recall. It is a tiny mention if he does, but I
Yes.
really don't think he does. Um, and because of all of that, like with the ghostly, it's so hard to picture some of these scenes because of the flowery language and the way Lee Mandelo writes. It's a little hard. And I think this book genuinely probably could be trimmed down a lot. Um I will say for the mystery aspect of this book, I could not tell where it was going. I had an idea like of who might have, you know, done what, but I couldn't tell you what they were doing. I could not have guessed where we were going on this ride, not even a little bit. It was bananas.
Yeah.
I will say, I don't. His pacing,
I have thoughts about it. I think
yeah.
I think that I don't even think the book needs to be shorter per se, but there's stuff that I wish we had spent more time on
Mm-hmm.
than like all of the flowery language around other things.
Yeah.
There's characters that I would have liked to have spent more time with. There's like certain plot points that I think could have been fleshed out more. Um, yeah, I definitely think that he could have trimmed down some of the language and been a little more straightforward with certain things. And then we would have been able to spend more time with other things and doing, you know, those plot points.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. Because at the end, I got to a place where I had maybe less than 73 pages left, and I was like, how are you going to wrap this up in 73 pages? Because this feels like I'm in the middle of the book. What the hell are you gonna do, dude?
Yeah,
Um, I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
he did
It
it.
could.
However, I technically like everything is wrapped up. Everything's tied with a neat little bow, but I
Mhm.
feel like because of the lack of fleshing out certain stuff, it does feel a little unsatisfying
Yeah.
because like there's certain things that we didn't get to spend enough time in. So by the end of it, it's like there's like a feeling of unsatisfaction,
Mm-hmm. It feels
dissatisfaction, whatever.
well, that's it. That's the kind of feeling it gives. Um, and I think there was a lot of times I noticed throughout this book, Lee Mandelo repeats himself so much. And
Yeah.
I think if that got cut down, like when I say this book could be trimmed, I mean in the fact of like the flowery language and him repeating himself. Like he constantly reiterates certain points that Andrew is struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you just talked about that 2 pages ago. You said the exact same thing 2 pages ago. We know. I promise you don't have to hold our hand that tight.
Yeah.
I promise.
I also think that
Uh,
like there's like I understand that part of it is supposed to feel repetitive for the character, but there
mhm.
are a lot of parts where I'm like, we are just kind of doing the same thing over and over again, like each chapter.
Yeah.
And I think that like, cause I'm a fairly quick reader, this took me a little bit to get through. One, I think because of the flowery language, but also because I kept having to reread stuff and like it really just felt like going in circles. Like there was a little bit of plot push, but like a lot of it just felt like the same thing. And we'll get into it in the spoiler section, but like a lot of it just felt like he was doing the same things or struggling with the same things and seeing the same people about those things and not taking their advice over and over and over again through like
Mm-hmm.
most of the book, probably until like the last quarter maybe of the book.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That I didn't super care for that. Um and again, it's one of those things where it's like instead of doing that, we could have spent time with other stuff.
Mm-hmm. And this is a 369-page book. This is kind of thick for some people. Like this is kind of hefty. So constantly going in circles the whole book can be exhausting. This book also took me a while to get through, and it was fairly like, okay, all right, we've done this before. Can we do something else? Andrew, please take somebody else's fucking advice. Oh my god. Rocks for brains. And
Yeah.
like to an extent, I understand the choice of that because at the end of the day, the grief, the kind of grief Andrew is going through, especially, feels like it is just you circling the drain. And it feels like you're just in a repetitive space. And I can completely understand and respect that. I do, however, think there is a way that that could have been done in a better sense, in a different way that didn't feel so exhausting as a reader.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think it is supposed to like evoke some of like his own feeling like he's kind of sludging through life, but as a reader it just makes it like not engaging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I will say, because this book has an atmosphere. It's supposed to be a Southern Gothic, so it does take place in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's taking place at a college called Vanderbilt. And I will say, I wish there was a little more atmosphere, just a little bit more atmosphere. I think Lee Mandela could have really leaned a little heavier into the Southern, like, Gothic kind of atmosphere, could have really leaned into, like, that kind of academia. Because the academia in the South is a different breed. It is. College in the South is a different breed. And I think he really could have leaned into that a little heavier. Um, I think when certain things occur, there is pretty good atmosphere. But I think he could have gone just a little bit of an extra mile, just a little, not a
It
whole lot.
also it doesn't help that like we don't get that much of the academic side of things. Like
Mm-hmm.
yes, there is like some stuff with like the advisor and the professor and stuff, but like he doesn't go to class. So like
That
we
baby
don't
does not
really
go to school.
and like the academic rivalry we see is either through other characters. I mean, that's pretty much it. It's through other characters because Andrew doesn't give a shit. He's there to solve the mystery. So there's this academic aspect that we only see like third party.
Mm-hmm. And I have thinking thoughts about that, and we will get to those in spoilers. I have complaints, but I think he could have really leaned into that atmosphere a little bit more. I think he could have given just a touch more. I think if he wanted to like use some flowery language, use it on the atmosphere. And it didn't feel like he did that. He used it on everything else but the atmosphere. And like Southern Gothics have such a specific taste to them. I haven't read very many myself. This is like one of my first. But Southern Gothics have such a very specific atmosphere. And I think it was very much touched upon in the terms of like it being the summer in the South and how rank nasty that is. Because my God, these characters are nasty. Nasty. It is sweat, dirty, sweaty, humid, gross, nasty all the time in this book. These characters have to be vile. They have to be rank. Yeah. The way they are constantly talking about how sweaty and nasty they are, which is honestly the reality of summer in the South. You're disgusting all the time if you step outside. It's gross. So like that atmosphere is leaned pretty heavy into. But in terms of the spook factor, I think we could have gone a little bit further down the line.
Like really the only spooky parts we get is when the ghosts show up.
Yeah. We really only get spooky things like when the ghosts show up and when certain things are revealed in the back half of the book. But other than that, it's really not that scary. It's not that spooky. It doesn't have that kind of, ghost story feel. And I know it is, in a way, a murder mystery, technically. Something of the sort. It's a mystery of sorts. With the ghosts added in and the Southern Gothic elements added in. So he probably wasn't that focused on that aspect of it. I think he wanted to tell a mystery, and that's what he did. But he wanted to do it with ghosts, and so he just put them in there.
Yeah, it definitely, I don't know, it felt like it was pulling in two different directions sometimes with like what genre it wanted to be. Like if it wanted to be a ghost story or a murder mystery, and I think it was leaning more towards murder mystery, and that kind of made the ghosts feel out of place a little bit.
Yeah. The ghosts do feel like when they pop up, you're like, oh yeah, we're in a ghost story. This is a problem that like we need to deal with. Sure. It's that vibe very much. In terms of characters,
Riley is the best one.
Riley is number one king. I love Riley so much. Riley is that one character I said that doesn't have rocks for brains. Riley is thinking. Riley has brain cells and is cooking with gas all the time. And good for him. Because everyone else around him, there's nothing going on upstairs. Not a lick of thought. Riley's the only one who has some sense. And God love him for it. And he is comedic gold. The comedic relief of the century. Love him so much. And we will get into the details of why we love Riley so much in a moment.
Okay, give me a second.
Teehee. Oh. Mhm.
Okay, sorry. We were talking about Riley.
Riley, the icon and legend that he is.
We love Riley.
Riley is my favorite character in the entire book. And that's fact. There is nobody else above him. We love Riley. Andrew.
This is my thing. I had such a hard time. Like, technically, I would argue that Eddie is still a main character.
Mm-hmm.
I had such a hard time, like, rooting for either of them. Like,
Yeah.
Like, the way that Andrew describes him, he kind of sounds like a dick. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't really, like, I cared more about other characters than I did about, like, our main character and the guy that we're supposed to be finding his murderer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I felt as well. It was hard to root for Andrew a lot of the time. And it was even harder to try and like see the good that Andrew saw in Eddie. Um and it's even harder to believe that Eddie had that many friends and was like that popular. I'm sorry. Yeah, Eddie sounded like he was an asshole a lot of the time. Eddie sounded like a dick. And Andrew, by proxy, acted like a dick. And just also had his own mess going on internally. And I know that is like it was very much his own internal struggle and coming to terms with a lot of things about himself and like who Eddie was and all of the things he thought he knew turning out to not be true and his own grief while also dealing with all of that mess. And I know that's what it was. I know it. I know it. Jesus Christ, Andrew, can you be a little nicer? Holy shit. Oh my god, these people are genuinely just trying to help you and you're being an asshole, Andrew. Please get it together. It was very hard to root for them, especially at a specific point with a specific character when a conversation is had. It becomes so hard to root for those two.
Yes.
I will say, they are not like the main character classic trope hero that's like you have to root for me, you have to. They are very much, they feel like regular people in the fact that regular people are assholes a lot, um especially dealing with the kind of things that they're dealing with. They are very regular guys, um and man, regular people are hard to root for. They're hard to root for.
Yeah.
Woo-wee.
I don't know. They were just. I, again, was just more interested in hearing about other characters than I was
Yeah.
about Eddie and Andrew.
Would it be unhinged of me to say that Mr. Lee Mandelo has the Stephanie Meyer effect where all of the side characters are cooler than the main characters?
Listen, a
Would
little bit.
it be it's very much, the side characters seemed a lot more fun to hang out with than the main characters were stuck with. I was like, I want to go over there. I want to see what they're doing. They seem like they're having a good time. And I was just told, no, you stay with the asshole, mean main character who's dealing with trauma. I was like, man,
Yeah. It definitely.
fine, I guess.
He was definitely. I don't know, man. I just didn't care for the two main characters. The cousins were much more interesting to me, and then
Mm-hmm.
even like outside of the cousins, like some of their friends and stuff were far more intriguing to me, and
Yeah.
we don't end up spending a lot of time with them, which sucks.
Yeah. I would have loved if this book had become a Scooby-Doo and the gang kind of thing,
Yes.
where it was the whole group instead of just Andrew and the cousins. But Andrew's too much of an asshole for that and doesn't want to ask anybody for help and doesn't want to share anything ever. So that would not have happened. Not with this Andrew. If maybe Andrew was a little different, maybe we could have had that. But not with this one. Not with this one, not at all. But I would have left for that. That would have been a sick thing, like a Scooby-Doo and all of them kind of come together to help. But no, that's not what we got. We got mean Andrew, who's got rocks for brains and has no thinking processing at all.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to give your non-spoiler rating of this book?
I will say my non-spoiler rating is maybe, I'm torn between giving it a 3 or a 3.5. I think I might lean, what's between a 3.5 and a 3? Because I feel like it falls
3.25?
a 3.25. I'll give it a 3.25 out of 5. There is a lot of good in this book. Like I said, I think Lee Mandelo has a lot of potential in this kind of sphere. I don't know if I'd pick up another one of his books. He feels like an author for me personally that is very much, it's either good or it's not. And this one was kind of a, I can't tell if this is your good or if this is your not. I guess we'll find out in your second book, buddy.
Yeah.
So I'd say 3.25.
I would give it a 3.5. The outside of Andrew and Eddie, I found a lot of the other characters to be compelling. I thought the like handling of like the dependency was interesting. Um, and I did like the way that the ghosts operated. I felt like it was unique. But the flowery language, the fact that the main character just isn't appealing, and like the weird caught between two genres feeling, all kind of just weighed it down and made it not that great of a read. It was still good. Like, I still enjoyed it. If somebody wanted something like a ghost story, like a Southern Gothic type ghost story with like a murder mystery aspect, I would recommend this, but this is not one that I would like reread or anything. It was okay.
Yeah, I feel the same. I do. There's also like some stuff like that's kind of like ham-fisted in at some points, but I'll talk about in spoilers. I was just like, this feels very out of nowhere, but okay, I guess. But we will talk about that in spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, get out. If you would, you can stay. So, spoiler time.
Spoiler time. I want to start off by saying that Andrew really is a fucking idiot, like through the whole book.
Andrew is brain dead the whole book.
And like
the whole book.
I recognize that like he is like going through something, like he's dealing with the grief. He's also on this like weird unhinged thing of trying to find out who killed Eddie and all this stuff. But like the way that he shuts down and like won't accept any advice and like seemingly only realizes stuff in like hindsight, like he'll miss like a week of class and then in hindsight go, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that because I still need access to these two people at the school. You know? Or like he immediately pegs like one specific person as like this guy must be the killer, and I feel like ends up overlooking a lot of other stuff until someone else tells him. And I don't know, he's the grief part of his story is, I like it. I like hearing him trying to work through it. I like towards the end when he finally gets rid of the ghost and can actually like process. Um I like the like juxtaposition between those two things, but I do not care for the rest of him really. Like
Uh-huh.
him and Eddie both kind of suck, and it's a thing of like they sucked together, and you know, they really cared about each other, and it feels like there's this weird line that is being towed but never like discussed of how bad they were for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um because you have on one hand Dell, who is their third childhood friend, who at one point Andrew was dating, and there was a situation with her, and then her and Andrew broke up, but they all remained friends. But
Uh-huh.
like there are several times where she is like, this is unhealthy. Even before he died, your guys' dynamic was unhealthy. Like you're not good for each other, etc. And like there are also times when even Riley, who is his roommate, that he kind of inherits when Eddie dies, because of the house that Eddie was living in to go to this college, he bought the house. So
Mm-hmm.
even at some points Riley is like, this is like weird, like your attachment is too much, you know, he's got all these people telling him this. And even in retrospect, he talks a lot about like feeling owned by Eddie, or like this like feeling of possessiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting all of this, but in the same turn, it's like not really addressed, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's like hand waved away, but it's like, I don't know if it's just because we're getting the book from Andrew's perspective that it's never really outwardly said of like, oh, we were bad for each other and we were only as close as we were because of this trauma bond. Um and I think that kind of led to then a weird dynamic with the romantic interest Sam, um and this continuing like feeling owned thing that never gets addressed, because we don't get to spend much time in Andrew and Sam's relationship once it turns like quote unquote romantic, which is one of the things that I have beef about, because I feel like that could
Yeah.
have been
It could have been so good.
so, it could have had so much more like long-term development for Andrew, instead of everything just kind of crashing down on him at the end and him suddenly like having this epiphany that he, you know, needs to do what he needs to do. Um and we just don't get time with his relationship with Sam. And it takes him like 2/3 of the way through the book to stop being a dick to Riley. And I feel like all of his character development, I feel like it's really spurred on by Dell coming to have that conversation. So
Mm.
basically, I guess if we go chronologically, the whole thing is that Eddie is from an old money family. And
Let's all remember that before we continue.
yeah,
Old money from the South.
yes.
Let's remember, old money from the South, they are white guys.
Yes.
Let's keep that, put a tack in that. Keep that there. Because my God.
So Eddie is from an old money family from the South, and they're him and Andrew were already friends. They were out on Eddie's land, and they fell in a sinkhole, and they ended up in these weird caverns that are like underneath the property. And they both got really messed up. And this is the part where I feel like it's not explained enough, because there's this whole thing of like, they both fell down there, they were both injured. Andrew passed out, and when he woke up, Eddie was gone. And he like crawls through the water and he finds Eddie, and he kind of just says that like Eddie was weird and like saying weird shit and like made him drink his blood. And like that's kind of all the explanation we get.
Yep.
And like reading that whole section, because we only all we really know is that they fell down the hole. Like, we don't know any details till much further in the book, and I feel like we should have maybe learned about that sooner, but whatever. And we find out because he tells Sam about it, but he's like only half telling Sam, and he even admits that he's not telling Sam everything. So there's still this weird like disconnect with it, and I feel like it could have been explained better.
Mhm.
But that's like their trauma bond moment, and they are both like cursed after that to see the haunting and the revenants and stuff that like follow them around.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like Eddie wants to lean into it and Andrew doesn't. And I don't, the whole thing with their dynamic, it gives like Eddie is like the rowdy, rough party boy, and Andrew is like his meek friend. And even though it's kind of expressed that that's not the situation, that's how it comes off because all we see of Andrew is him being a piss baby and like kind of being a dick. Because every time he meets someone, they're like, "Oh, Eddie didn't tell us, or like Eddie told us that you would be way different than how you're behaving now." And like I recognize that that's because of the grief and stuff, but we don't really get to see how he was before other than like through very small snippets of him talking about like partying with Eddie, but that is specifically with Eddie. Like we don't get to know about Eddie's perception of him or anyone else's perception of him, even like Dell when she comes to talk. It's like very focused on his relationship with Eddie, and we don't get to know Andrew outside of that really. Um which is also kind of frustrating. Um and Eddie ends up dead, and basically Eddie is haunting Andrew. That's why he goes to the house, and that's why he's trying to figure out what happened, because Eddie is haunting him and like showing him visions of his death and kind of pushing him to figure out who did it. And there's also some confusion with that because he kind of explains it as if like this is not really Eddie, but obviously he's trying to enact some of Eddie's will, like the ghost. It's a little weird.
It's
I
very, very hard to follow.
Yes, I like the visuals of it, like when he talks about like the ghost sitting in him and like seeing like the skeletal hands in his own, and I think that stuff was interesting. Um but I don't know, just Andrew was just not a compelling character. His grief was interesting. I didn't really care about his motives. I didn't really care about like I just didn't really care about him that much. I was much more interested in Riley and Sam and finding out like who the murderer was. I
Yeah.
didn't really care that much about Andrew's development, especially because we didn't even really see any development until we were already like almost at the end of the book anyway.
Yeah. It takes Andrew a long time to do any kind of developing. Takes him a while. Takes him a long while. It takes him the entire summer. So it takes him he only starts to really develop towards the end of the book, which, is towards the end of the summer. So it takes him over 2 months to develop. Uh, and I mean, I guess that is like real, and that it takes humans a long time to develop and like change and all that. So I guess that's real of it. But as a reader, it's hard to fucking sit through that for that long. It's hard to sit through that. Um, and like because everyone around him genuinely wants to help him. And I know it's the whole another reason of like why he's like, no, I don't want any of your help. I don't need any help, whatever, is because he's suspicious of everyone. He is paranoid and suspicious of everyone around him, and he thinks that one of them killed Eddie. When in reality, that is not the case. Everyone just kind of wanted to help him. That's all. Everybody except one person who was the killer wanted to help him. And he was just like, no, fuck you guys. I don't need any of your help. I'm doing this by myself. Blah, blah, blah. Womp, womp, womp. But he would still try to interact with these people to get the scoop and see if they did kill Eddie. And I was just like, Andrew, please. It's not them, buddy. The answer's staring you in your face.
Yeah, it was a lot of like he would like he would have these thoughts of like, okay, I have to get close to these people to get information about what happened to Eddie. But then he would just be like rude as shit to them. Like there was several points where he just like refuses to talk to them. And especially with Riley, like there are several times because Riley knows what's happening. Nobody else knows what's happening to him for most of the book. Because other people can't see the ghosts that are following him. Riley can, which is another bone I have to pick because we never really learn why.
Yeah.
Other than he's psychic, I guess, is kind of the answer. Whatever.
Oh.
But like Riley can see it, and there are several times where Riley is like, we need to talk about this. And had Andrew like had those conversations, I think his development would have been more interesting, and we would have had more like mystery solving had Riley known more about what was happening earlier on. But we didn't get that. And again, then we also didn't get Riley and like why he is the way that he is, because most of the time it's just kind of hand waved away. You know? It's usually just like Riley being uncomfortable in Andrew's presence, and sometimes Sam being like, you need to not get involved with that, because Sam has like some inkling that something's going on with Riley. But like that's it. Like we don't get, is this like a genetic thing? There's like mentions of his grandmother, but like we never get any detail. They just kind of go, yeah, he's psychic, I guess.
Yeah.
And like that's the whole reason that like Eddie had picked him to move in with him, because he wanted help, and Riley had some like supernatural tie. And then it just kind of like, and then he uses Riley for like research work. Like we never even really get to see Riley, quote unquote, out in the field helping with the ghost stuff, because between Sam and Andrew they just keep him at home. So it feels like a weird addition that didn't necessarily need to be there for the sake of having like a roommate character that just then doesn't get fleshed out.
Yeah. Now that I'm really thinking about it, there are like some things about the way Sam and Andrew treat Riley where I'm like, is this something a little deeper, or like is it just like that Sam is a good cousin and like he helped raise Riley and he cares a lot, or is it something else? I don't know, because there's a reveal of sorts, kinda, that Riley is trans. Riley is a trans man, and I wonder if that has something to do with the way they treat him, like he will break so easy.
I mean, I
And
don't think so. It seems like on Sam's end, it seems like a thing of he feels like a fuck up, and him and Riley have more of like a sibling relationship than cousins, and Sam feels like he's fucked up his life and he doesn't want Riley to do the same. He talks about how Riley has the best academic career out of anyone in the family. Riley has like a chance to make something of himself. And he feels like Riley running around doing supernatural shit with Andrew puts that in jeopardy. And he also talks about like, I think they don't touch on it. He says something and I feel like it could have been expanded upon, but like at one point Sam tells Andrew like Eddie did for him what I couldn't do even with 10 years of saving, which is that Eddie pays for Riley's top surgery within like a few weeks of meeting him. And so I don't think it's like a transphobic thing. I think it's genuinely from on Sam's part that he is concerned about Riley's future, and on Andrew's part, I think this is also why I don't care for Andrew. He's has no like self-motivation, except for maybe towards the end, right? Like most of the book his motivation is Eddie and Eddie's ghost pushing him to do stuff, and then when Sam comes into the picture like full force, he's just kind of doing what Sam wants. And in this case, Sam doesn't want Riley involved, so Andrew keeps Riley at home, and then again we lose fleshing out of his power. So
yeah, that's real. That makes sense.
We also don't like talk about like Riley being trans is never discussed. Like there's
Never.
there's the moment where he like takes his shirt off and Andrew sees the scars, and that's fine and dandy. But like that's kind of it. And then again, the top surgery conversation, and at one point Sam mentions when he came to live with him and their grandmother that he shaved Riley's head in the bathroom.
Yeah.
But like beyond that, it's not discussed. And this is another issue I take with the book a little bit, is like there's these social issues and like representation that are brought up and then not expanded upon. So like Riley is trans and also polyamorous, and also bisexual. So like first of all, putting all of your representation on one character, whatever. But there is like kind of like weird like friction because of those things. So not even necessarily the transness, but like very early on in the book, Riley takes Andrew to one of Sam's parties, and Riley starts making out with a guy at the party, and there's somebody else there who calls him a slur and brings up Eddie's name in relation to this, and Andrew gets mad and punches the guy. There's also, it's like implied, there's implications of if Eddie was sleeping with or having like touchy-feely things happening with men while he was in Nashville without Andrew, or if it's just because he talked about Andrew so much that people thought he was gay. Either way, this guy brought it up and Andrew punches him. And yeah, there's also like some weird friction when other people are talking about Riley's relationship with his two partners, but like again, none of this stuff is ever expanded upon. It's kind of just like that's just the way it is, and then they move on.
Yeah.
The biggest one that I have a gripe with, because they don't really expand upon it, is there is a character named West who...
Thank you for bringing up West, because I was just about to say it.
He is, like a mentor. So he's in his, like, last... He's been in the school longer. They're all there for, like, thesis stuff. It's, like, graduate work. And... so he was Eddie's mentor, and then there's the professor who, like, is the advisor. So the advisor advised both West and Eddie, and then West was Eddie's mentor. And he then kind of becomes Andrew's mentor, because Andrew just kind of inherits everything. And he is a black man, and... like, this doesn't really come into play that much till towards the end of the book, because for a long time, Andrew thinks that West maybe is the one who killed Eddie, because they had, kind of, like, competing, like, academic careers, especially with their advisor, who is, Dr. Troth, and, like, both wanting her attention, and, like, later it's kind of revealed that when Eddie showed up, that Dr. Troth moved all of her tension away from West, and that her and West had already had tension because she stole his research and published it on her own. And like, it's mentioned somewhere that he tried to take it to like the dean of the school and like the administration, and the administration was basically like, we're not going to do anything about it. And like all of this is surrounded by an implication that this has to do with West's race, because he's a black man. This is the South. It's a rich kid school. There's a point where he talks about like, you've been to Troth's like dinner parties and you know the type of people that are there, where it's like a sea of white people. And like all of this is kind of touched upon, but then it's never like expanded upon. Like it's kind of like implied that Vanderbilt has like this institutional like systemic racism built into it, and then we don't hear about it, and like it has nothing to do with the killer's motivations. It doesn't affect our main character beyond him hearing about it. It's like brought up at the end as like an epilogue thing of like West sues the school and like wins because of what happens at the end of the book, and like that's it, and there's no other expansion upon it. And it feels very weird to me to like put that in there and then not have any expansion or further discussion about what the fuck all that was about.
Yeah. That was the thing, like in the non-spoiler section that I said felt very ham-fisted in. That topic specifically felt so strange and ham-fisted, especially at the end. I was like, what? What? Okay. And all of the stuff with Riley and the representation and things like that feel very just, oh yeah, I should have a trans character. There he is. Oh, I should have a bi character or a poly character. And I put it on the trans guy. And it felt very like, you know, you can space that out right. You can there's multiple people. There's a lot of people here. We can make it work. We can make it work. And he really didn't do that, and it felt kind of funky and like weird while reading it. Especially the treatment of West. I didn't care for the way West was treated and the way West's story kind of went. Like when I say everybody else felt more interesting, West probably has such interesting backstory, and because West isn't from the South, West is from up north, and he came down here for school, and then he had like his research stolen by Troth. Fuck that bitch. All my homies hate Troth, and we will get to her dumbass quickly. But poor West comes down here for school, gets his stuff stolen. The school says, fuck you. And then he's forced to work with her still and like get her help. But she constantly rejects him just to keep him here longer and like fuck up his life. And it's like, can you like touch upon that a little bit more, please? I think that could be really interesting. And maybe Andrew needs it. Mr. Rocks for brains.
Yeah, there's also just like there is like an overarching theme of like systemic racism being an issue, because like at the first party he goes to is Sam. He's like, it is all white men for the most part. Like, I think he says something like Ethan is the only non-white person here, because I think Ethan is Asian. And at one point he asks Riley why he didn't bring his girlfriend, and he's like, she wouldn't be caught dead at one of these places. And like Andrew says later that it was for her safety. And like, and so you have that, and that's outside of the school. And then in the school you have these discussions about how it's mostly white people with West and like the stolen research and his treatment. So there's this like this weird theme where he's talking about how it's mostly white people, but then it's never really addressed, and it has nothing to do with anybody's motivations. Like, you're putting in commentary about rich Southern life, but like you're not doing anything with it, and that was a little off-putting to me.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about the handling of Eddie and Andrew's relationship, because I think it's interesting and the framing is interesting, especially with Dell as like a third party, but I don't know, I didn't care for some of the like Eddie like hitting people when they're being accused of being gay, because that's giving like homophobes are really just closeted gay people, which is like not a good rhetoric to have. I don't know, there's some stuff with like what is supposed to be representation, personally I don't think was handled that well. And I kind of wish that either it had been addressed differently or more, or that like we had taken it out of like the party side of things and we only see it at the school or something, because it just felt like such a weird shoo-in, and I didn't care for it.
Yeah. There is really truly not much balance between the party side of this life and then the academic stuff. There is truly no balance. There's also street racing. We didn't touch upon that. There's street racing. Why are they street racing? I don't know. But that's involved, and like at the party, the thing about it, the thing that kind of irks me, like even while I was reading it and especially now talking about it, is Sam is so worried about Riley and his choices and like, making sure he doesn't fuck up his future. And yet they're having these big fucking parties out in the sticks and they're doing coke. All right, I guess that's the college kid life. I wouldn't know it, but damn, you like claim to care so much about Riley and Riley's future, and yet cocaine, coke. All right, and I guess, and especially
Yeah.
the way Sam in the beginning was very hard to like. Sam in the beginning took some growing, but he got there. He became better. I think Sam got easier to like. But at the beginning, when the party happens and all of that, and like Andrew gets into the fight, um, Sam is like, "Yeah, we're doing coke. Go get the book, Riley." And Riley's just like, "I don't know if Andrew should be doing all that. I don't know." And Sam's like, "He'll be all right. Go get it." And I'm just like, "Eh." I didn't care for that. In the same like the same character will also be like, I care so much about my cousin's safety and I care so much about his future and I want better for him. Meanwhile, they are doing illegal street racing.
Yeah. I think also, like, I think the problem is that there's supposed to be like a parallel between Sam and Eddie, and that they're very similar people
Mhm.
and they have like similar lifestyles and values and like they behave similarly, while also trying to make Sam stand as his own character. And I feel like the differentiating factors just end up being contradictory to
Yeah.
who he is. So, like, you're trying to make him seem like Eddie in the sense that he's a party guy and he's kind of a dick and he, thinks highly of himself, but at the same time trying to make him seem like this kind, down to earth older brother figure. And I feel like there's like clashing narratives there. Um, I liked Sam more at the end of the book, but I still think there was like this weird clashing thing and still carrying this weird like toxic energy in Andrew's relationships of his like whole like weird ownership thing. Like at one point he they end up sleeping together. Um and afterwards Sam texts him and says like, I don't share, not even with a dead man. And I I just thought it was so weird because it's like this just feels like he has the same possessive energy as Eddie and nothing is changing. Like
Mm.
this he like later like even later Andrew was like, you're not a replacement for Eddie, blah blah blah. But it's like kind of feels like it because this has like the same weird energy, and I think because we didn't get to sit with it for very long before like shit hits the fan, um and he basically scares Sam off, like it's very hard to see it as anything other than a weird extension of his relationship with Eddie.
Yeah, I heavily agree. Heavily agree. I really do wish we had gotten to sit with Sam and Andrew more. Not just like as the party guys or as friends, but that like watching their romance grow would have helped that like the fucking toxic ass trope of it all. I think would have been better, like would have grown better had we sat with it a little longer. But we really don't get to, because right after they finally sleep together and and Andrew finally feels, there's a part after like him and Sam sleep together where he's like, I thought I would feel ashamed and I thought I would feel um like weird about it, but I don't. I feel very light and happy and all of this. And I'm like, I would have loved to see like Andrew kind of figuring that out and like getting to have that with Sam, because the only other time he's known anything like that was with Eddie, and even then he was not fully aware of it. Let's get into the I would like to pull out my favorite quote where after the party and Andrew gets into the fight because they call Riley a slur and they like implicate Eddie and Andrew into it, and Andrew gets mad and beats ass. There comes a point where Riley's driving him home and Riley's like, man, you don't need to fight for me. That's fine. I don't care. But I understand why you did it for Eddie. He was yours. That's the language that's used a lot is he was yours. Like he was mine, things like that. But then the quote continues. I found it. Riley says, "Don't be. I wouldn't let someone talk shit about him either, and he was he was yours. You were together." No, Andrew said, "It wasn't like that. We weren't like that." Riley said, "What?" And Andrew just says, "I'm not gay." And Riley goes, "Oh my god, you've got to be fucking kidding me. You're serious?" That's my favorite quote in the entire book. Oh, and also now noticing Eddie asks, "The scars you've got." Eddie helped me pay for it, generous guy. That really is just kind of glossed over because I only just now noticed that. That's so glossed over.
There's like at some point Riley tries to like talk about it and Andrew just refuses and then they never circle back to it.
There are a lot of like plot points that are glossed over or kind of dropped completely. Mm-hmm. Like the psychic stuff is very glossed over, kind of dropped completely. I would have loved to know like Sam and Sam and Riley's grandmother kind of was into some witchcraft and stuff like that. And I would have loved to know about her history because we get to know in the like scour of answers to figure out what happened to Eddie, we get to know a lot of like Southern history and stories of like ghosts and things. I would have loved to hear Sam and Riley talk about their grandmother. I would have loved to hear about that, but we don't get to. And it makes me sad because that probably could have been helpful. I feel that probably could have been helpful in like not like the answers, but how to deal with the ghosts. Maybe it could have been something there, but we don't get to know that. And that makes me sad. But I found my other favorite quote flipping through the book. After the fight, when Andrew says, "I'm not gay," and Riley's like, "Yeah, sure, okay, man. Whatever you say." And they get home. Andrew is sleeping in Eddie's room and wearing Eddie's clothes. And Riley walks into like Eddie's room and looks at Andrew dressed in Eddie's clothes and says, "For fuck's sake, Andrew, is there anything in this scenario that feels heterosexual or well-adjusted to you?" And it takes me out. It takes me out. I love Riley. But there's just so much that's glossed over and really not touched on. Or if it is only vaguely touched on at the end. Like, getting into the actual meat of the mystery. Who did it? It was Troth. Fuck that bitch. That lady showed up and I said immediately no. Immediately no. I've seen what I needed to see. I don't fuck with you. I don't like you, lady. I do not care for you. Her vibe was terrible the second she came onto my page. I have so many words about that lady. I don't like her. And she was just weird. She was weirdly pushy. All that. She was a racist, apparently, the way she treats West. Like, just all that. She was a thief. And just a terrible person all around. And then come to find out, she's the one who killed Eddie. Why, you might ask? Let's get into that. There is a curse on Eddie's family that really we hear about maybe twice. it is explained through like this little old couple that Eddie was going to interview, and uh you know, they're like, oh yeah, the Fulton family curse. And Sam and Andrew are like, what the fuck do you mean by that? Curse, huh? And so they explain the story, and it's like the second son of the Fulton family wanted to marry a girl who was sick. So he made like a blood deal with the land and like whatever lives in the land, which I wish that would have been more expanded upon. Like, what do you mean what lives in the land? What's there? Um what? Uh and the blood deal made him be able to have power over death in a way. Um and so he could stop his wife from dying, but it like drove them mad. And that's it. And so the land of the Fultons is cursed and always wants its blood, and so death comes for every Fulton. So Eddie's parents are dead. He's dead now. And now Andrew is the heir and the inheritance, like has the inheritance of the land and the money and everything of the sort. And this, I would, on the notion, while we're talking about this curse and the land and all that, I would like to talk about my favorite Andrew has rocks for brains moment. You know, the little old woman's talking about the land and whatnot, and she talks about how the second son puts the wife up in that big plantation house and gets her all the best care money can buy. And Andrew's like, the Fultons had a plantation? Very confused. And she's like, oh, of course. I bet the old house is still standing out there, but you wouldn't know it. The ones that came back after the war moved to the opposite end of the land and built fresh. And Andrew comes with a reckoning. He says on some land, it says on some level, Andrew had forgotten, spending his years as a teen and young man in northern Ohio, that histories had a longer, uglier reach where he was from. His mind turned straight to the fat zeros in his accounts, the estate he'd inherited, and the implications of where it came from with a creeping dread. Of course the Fultons had owned a fucking plantation. How else had he imagined them getting rich? Yes, Andrew. Holy shit. Oh my god. I rocks for brains. Rocks for brains. I feel like that should have been the first thing you think about. When there is an old money family from the South and they are white, where did all of that money come from? I wonder.
But that's
holy shit,
Andrew. This is also the weird thing too, though. Is like they bring it up, and we have this like implications with, again, that Sam's parties are full of white dudes, that, you know, Vanderbilt is systemically racist, and Eddie's family owned a plantation, but then it never, outside of like Wes's little plot line, never gets addressed, never talked about. So it's like, why are we even talking about it?
Why is it here? What's the purpose?
You're not gonna like address it further.
The only reason I could think that it would be there is because that kind of land with that kind of history is, its history is steeped in death. It is steeped in terrible things and terrible feelings. And that is the reality of the situation. It is steeped in awful, awful things. And that could be why the land was able to make that kind of curse and deal, if we want to really get into it. But it's not addressed that way. It is just glossed over, and there's nothing like explained about it. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the author needs to hold the audience's hand for everything. But I feel like maybe this is the thing that should have been explained more. And it wasn't.
I feel like it wasn't even meant to be plot relevant. Like, it just, this is why I feel weird about a lot of these things, is like, you can have representation without it needing to be plot relevant. And you can talk about these things like as an overarching thing, but the way that it's brought up makes it seem like they're going to be plot relevant, and then they're just not. And then you're just left with this feeling of like, okay, so everyone's racist, but we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then, like with Troth, I feel like he really could have done like a kind of like Get Out-esque scenario with Troth and like her motivations for wanting the curse and her motivations for killing Eddie. And instead, what we got was she's trying to save her dying husband's life, which
Yeah.
is tropey and honestly not that compelling. When they reveal, as soon as I already had, as soon as she showed up, I was like, okay, this lady's being weird. I have a feeling it's her because she's like the most unassuming person in the room. And they talk about several times how she couldn't have done it because she wasn't strong enough to have lifted him or whatever. And like they make that point several times, and I'm like, okay, the actual mystery part of this book was not even that mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, clearly it was her. And as soon as we got to the point where Andrew goes to talk to her husband, and he's like sickly and he has cancer, I was like, okay, so clearly she wants the power for one reason or another because she thinks it can save her husband. And that is
Mm-hmm.
just not a compelling motivation to me. Especially not with like all of the other stuff that could have been her motivation. Like there's this whole thing about how she wants to just steal the research that Eddie did. There's stuff again with like this weird racial tension between her and West. There's so many like other things he could have done, and to just have it be she just wanted to save her husband is really not compelling to me. And
Yeah.
frankly, I think it's a little boring.
Yeah, it's boring. Once again, the fucking plantation house gets brought up and like for no fucking reason at all. At one point, Troth is throwing a little soiree, and it's at her house, and Andrew and Riley go, and Andrew can like, because of what happened in that cavern, he can feel death and he can see the ghosts and all that, and he's sitting in this woman's house, and he's talking about how the house seethed around them, responding to like a nudge with his like little ghostly powers that aren't really touched upon. And he feels the boards under his feet were steeped in death, stained to the foundations with knowledge and time. And I'm like, yes, of course it was, Andrew. It's a plantation. We know. The only one who doesn't know and needs to comment on it is you. And rocks for brains.
What's crazy is I feel like that's not even what the implication was supposed to be, because like Riley, so they're having this conversation, they're at her house, Riley sneaks into her library, and when he comes out, he's like, that was really creepy, she has lots of creepy shit in there. And later, Andrew goes into the library and we get to see what's in there, and it's just a bunch of like heirloom shit from her family. And like I feel like it's kind of implied that that's why there's so much death in the house. Is it just because it's been around for a long time, and it's not actually because of the slavery aspect? So it's weird to like, it's just very strange. The way that the stuff is brought up is very odd to me, and it's not a motivating factor for anybody. It's only ever brought up really when it comes to West, and like that's kind of it, and it's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And then you end up just giving your villain a really not compelling like motive. And when they did the whole reveal at the end, I was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense, but I was kind of disappointed. I was like, I would have been fine with it being Troth had it been some other motivating factor other than like her dead husband, because and then in the end they fucking kill him. Like Sam kills him because they walk into her house and she drugs them, because of course she does. And
oh my god. Wait, before we continue, can we go on that? This is a woman you suspect for murder. Once again, rocks for brains. No thinking, no thoughts. This is a woman you suspect for your best friend's murder. And you're gonna drink the coffee she gives you? Are you stupid? Oh my god. I was like, why are you doing that? Sam and Andrew, you two are idiots. We need Riley here. If Riley was here, who you left at home, he would have said, no thank you, we don't need any coffee. And this wouldn't have happened. Oh my god. Anyway, continue.
So she drugs them, and they come to, and she's doing her weird ritual thing, also not explained. She's just kind of doing shit, and Riley like lets Eddie's ghost into him, and like that's how they escape or whatever. Um, but in the process of this, Sam ends up in like a tussle with the husband and ends up killing him anyway. And it's like, all right, so this is like, regardless, this was all for nothing. And
Yeah.
there's also like, nothing is properly described in this book. Like, in order to save Sam, Andrew, like, the way he describes it is like that he's eating her magic or something, and that it kills her. I don't know. He doesn't touch her, and he describes it as like an eating thing. But later when we find out about the autopsy, they just said that her heart stopped. So it's like a metaphysical thing that is just not properly explained.
No. It feels like maybe the ghost just completely sucked her life force out in a way, but it really is not explained very well. It's a very confusing kind of like scene. Very strange. Also, just the fight scene, like the tussle between Sam, the husband, and Troth is really hard to picture. There comes a point where she's got a knife and she's like trying to cut Sam, but the husband is on top of Sam because he's strangled him like with his handcuffs, because he's cuffed up and tied up, and somehow at some point Troth cuts his face and like cuts across his eye, and it said that he lost sight in the eye, and I'm just like, that's reading that scene, because I read it back once I learned that like he was cut across the eye. It really doesn't like read that way. It reads like he just got maybe like a slash on the leg, maybe a slash on the arm. Like he got hurt, but nothing that serious. And because it's not written very clearly to get that point across, it's very, very odd. Also, with Troth and her motivations, in that same party scene where like Andrew meets the husband and tells him like the story about the Fulton curse and all that, afterwards they come out of the room and Troth is very upset, like, very emotional, and Andrew's looking at pictures on her wall, and it's a family photo of her, the husband, and their two
Oh my
daughters.
god, I completely forgot about that.
It drove me insane. Andrew asks about it, and he's like, "Oh, are these your daughters?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I think I mentioned them once. That's my oldest. She's at Columbia, and then my youngest would have been your age. What happened to her? What do you mean would have? And it's never told. She does not say, and we do not learn. And I felt that could have been a cool motivation, like with the dead daughter, if she like, because what? But no, that's not what we got, and it's never explained. The daughter's just dead for some reason, and we don't know why. We don't know if she was sick, if she was killed. I thought maybe because the whole Fulton family curse happened because the second son sacrificed his sister, and I thought maybe the Troth sacrificed her own daughter, and I thought that would be sick and twisted, and that would be a really interesting way to make her evil as fuck. No, we don't get that. We don't get that. She just said she would have been your age, and then it is never touched on. It is completely dropped, and it drove me up the wall.
Yeah.
Absolutely drove me insane. I was so like, what?
So
annoying.
I'm gonna touch on the very ending now, because I just like, again, we don't spend very much time with Andrew's like budding relationship with Sam before they go to the house and get drugged. And basically what happens freaks Sam out really bad, and like he just doesn't talk to Andrew after that. They're both in the hospital, and at one point Andrew goes over there and Sam is basically like, I don't want to fucking talk to you. And is like, we don't owe each other shit. Like, I've paid my debt back to Eddie, and you're taking care of Riley, whatever. And then Andrew decides to get rid of the ghost. I don't know how he came to the conclusion that this is what to do. Basically, him and Riley go to the Fulton property. They burn down the old plantation house. And then at one point there was a ring that belonged to Eddie that somehow Troth had, and like it somehow marked him to her that he also had the curse. Again, not touched on, never explained. Anyway, they go to the Fulton property. They burn down the plantation house, and then he like forces Eddie's ghost into the ring and then throws it down the sinkhole that they had fallen through as children, and he's suddenly ghost free. And then he goes they're planning to go street racing, and he texts Sam and he's like, "Do you want to come with us?" And he says, "See you tonight." And they have like the briefest moment in Sam's car where basically he's like, "I want to start over." And like the issues that Sam brings up, like the things that he says he took issue with Andrew, I'm like, I can see it, but like you never expressed this prior to this. Like he talks about how like he felt like their relationship wasn't equal, and that like he was giving a lot more than he was getting back from Andrew. And like I understand that, because that was kind of Andrew's whole thing through the whole book, is that he's taking from people and not reciprocating. But like that was never an issue prior, and it never seemed like that was the vibe of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then Andrew like tries to kiss him, and he's like, "No, we have to start over," and like build up to that. And then that's kind of the end of the book.
Yeah.
And it was very unsatisfying, and it felt very weird and kind of abrupt. Yeah, I don't know. It's such an interesting premise. The ghost mechanics are cool, but the actual writing and the characters and the ending was just not great, and it just left me feeling very like unsatisfied. I was like, this is the ending for the book? Okay.
Yeah.
I guess. Sure.
Like when I said I had 75 pages left, and I was like, I do not understand how this is going to end in a satisfying way in this short amount of time, because I feel like we're in the middle of the action. What do you mean? And it did end, but it was not satisfactory. And I will say, the ending, when Andrew and Riley go to the Fulton house and they burn it down, and then, Andrew pushes Eddie into the ring and, like, wants him gone finally, like, to go to the other side, whatever, did hurt my feelings and did make me cry. And I will say, I don't know if that necessarily was the writing that did it. I think it was just because I was listening to House in Nebraska by Ethel Cain, and that song makes me cry as is. So I think it was that. If you've never listened to Preacher's Daughter by Ethel Cain, please go do it. It's a great album. But I felt the album fit the vibe of this, and like the southern creepy gothic, kind of vibe. And it did. It felt right. But I think that's why I cried at the end of this book. I might also just be a little crybaby bitch, but that's fine. That's okay. There is a point in the ending where, like after the whole thing with Troth, it's him and Eddie in his body. So like him and Eddie are sharing the body. They're up there in his brain, just hanging out. And like Riley comes and visits him in the hospital, and he talks about like how he's sharing Eddie's memories now, and he's sharing the memories of himself that Eddie saw. And he talks about the tender awfulness of remembering himself through Eddie's eyes, beautiful and cherished and wanted with raw, confused intensity, with ownership. a sublimated, tangled connection that Eddie had never spoken or unpacked, though it loomed so large. And I'm just like, that, it's so, it sounds very pretty. And then the ownership term comes, and I'm just like, Like, Eddie and Andrew had tattoos on their wrists that they gave each other. And when Dell comes around and reads Andrew to filth, she talks about how I knew we were done and over with when Eddie marked you with that tattoo. And oh man. The reading that Dell gave Andrew, she gooped and gagged him. She gagged him. Oh, she gagged me. I had to close the book. It was just too much for me to bear. I was like, oh my god, girl. You're oh She comes in and talks about how both Eddie and Andrew used her to be with each other intimately without admitting that they were gay and wanted to be with each other. And it was a fucked up thing to read, and it made me not like Andrew even more than I already did. That I already didn't like him. It really made me not like Andrew, and it really made me not like Eddie. I was just like, damn. But she reads him, and she tells him all of that, and she's like, she talks about how one night she tried to come over, like, to Andrew's dorm, and Eddie was awake while Andrew was asleep and like was like holding him or whatever while he slept, and he gave her the meanest glare, like, back off of him. And she talks about how the only reason it became the three of them doing stuff is because Eddie was mad that Andrew was with Dell and he wanted in to be with Andrew. And Andrew's just like, it wasn't like that, baby. Sweet summer child. Yes, it was. Yes, it was, and I need you to come to grips with that today, because everybody else around you has come to grips with it and everybody else sees it. Why aren't you? Andrew is just a dummy dumb with no thinking thoughts. And I feel he only gets thinking thoughts in the last like 5 pages. To be so honest and real. Maybe in the last like 10. But other than that, he's a dummy. He is a dumb man. And yeah, like, I'm remembering all the things now that were glossed over in the fact of like, Andrew asks Riley about him, Ethan, and Luca, his girlfriend, and he's like, is it like the three of y'all all together, or is it like one-on-one? What is it? And Riley's just like, it's usually just me and Ethan. He only likes guys, but yeah. And then Andrew literally says, I have more questions, but I'm not going to ask them. Why? Why not? Why not, Andrew? Why not, Andrew? And so that it just gets glossed over a lot. So many things. If Andrew was just a little bit nicer and asked more questions and talked to people, actually, so many more things probably would have gotten like very detailed explanations, and it would have been fleshed out, and it would have been better. But because Andrew's a dick and doesn't talk to anyone, we don't get that. And it was very frustrating. The whole book, it was pretty frustrating. The things that motivated me through this book were Riley.
Yeah.
And Riley alone.
Riley, some of the humor I think is well written, like it's timed well. I liked Riley. I liked Ethan and the rest of the quote unquote pack, because that's what he calls them. I liked Sam up until the end. I just didn't care for whatever happened at the end with them.
Yeah.
And I liked Dell. But like, I just didn't like Andrew or Eddie, and I didn't care for the motivations of either of them. I didn't care for the motivations of Troth. I felt like there was all this flowery language and repetition when we could have been spending time with other stuff. It just didn't feel very fleshed out where it needed to be.
Yeah.
and some of the like racial stuff is a little weird. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a bad book, but like looking back and talking about it, I'm like, actually, I don't think I cared for this book very much. I just some of it was good. The humor was good. I think my favorite parts were probably the humor, but like the actual plot, the motivations, the who done it, none of it was very motivating or compelling in any way.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like the humor and Riley and the side characters were the best pieces of this book. Like, there's a point where where Andrew goes to a party with Ethan and is tripping on LSD, and it's like such a funny, like, interesting scene. Especially if you read while listening to music like I do. If you pair it with like good party music, it's a really funny scene to read. Um, I loved it. I Ethan was great, and I wish we got more of Ethan, and I wish we got to see more of Ethan and Riley together because I think they would have been really cute. Because after that party, Andrew comes home and Riley's like, I'm glad you're going out and having a good time with my boyfriend. Like, I'm glad you're being social. And I wish we could have seen more of that, but we don't because we're stuck with Andrew, and Andrew doesn't like anyone. God damn it, Andrew. But yeah, especially now talking about it and like going through the details, I realized how much more than I thought was glossed over or dropped entirely or just not explained very well. Um, Also, Lee Mandelo loves to use the word ass. Loves to use the word ass for whatever reason. I kept noticing that, and it would take me out of the moment every single time. Like, it was like, you know, Andrew fell on his ass. Andrew takes his phone out of his ass pocket. Just constant, constant. And I'm just like, okay, there's other words, right? You can say back pocket. Wouldn't that be crazy?
Yeah,
But, ooh,
I also didn't care for the way that he I don't under okay, this is my last complaint, and then I think we gotta wrap up.
yeah,
But I didn't care for the way that texting was formatted in this book because it was very
yeah.
inconsistent, and I just don't understand. Like, maybe this isn't Lee Mandelo's fault, but basically the way that the texting works is that sometimes it'll say like he texted me this, and then it'll have it in like italics, and sometimes it'll be like chat bubble images that are like inserted in the book, which is that's how the book starts. It starts with like two chat bubbles that say come home, I'll be waiting, and then it says received and like a date and time. And this is supposed to be Eddie texting Andrew.
Mhm.
And like that's great and all, and like they use this like texting format throughout, but then again it's not consistent. Like there are times where he just puts it in italics, and I would have much preferred if it had been one or the other, because it's a
Yeah,
little confusing and I didn't care for it.
yeah. It's like, pick one, dude. Are you gonna do it with the little bubbles, or are you gonna do it in italics? Because personally, I would prefer it if it was the bubbles, just like in the chat bubbles. I don't mind books that are formatted that way. I think they can be an interesting way to tell stories. Um, but he did not pick one. He used both, and I was like, "This is a nuisance. What? What do you? Uh, Pick one. I don't. What are you doing?" Like I said, I do think Lee Mandela has a lot of potential. I think he's got the building blocks to make something good. He's got the talent to make something good. He just needs to put the building blocks in the right places to do it. I really hope he's an author who over time will grow and like learn and like let his writing style evolve for the better. Instead of being an author that is this book is good or this book is bad and that's all that he's known for. Like, he'll have a great book and then he'll have a bad book and then a great book and a bad book and back and forth and back and forth. I don't want him to be that kind of author. I hope really truly that as time goes in his career, it just gets better and better for him, because I really do think he's got the stuff to make it work. He just has to get there. And I hope he gets there in time. I really do.
Yeah.
So yeah. Rating still, you know what? I might change it.
I also might change it. In retrospect and like talking about it, I would actually probably give this like a 2.5 and not a 3.5.
I think I would agree with you on that one, my friend. I think after talking about it and really like analyzing it with another person, it's less than a 3. I'd give it like a 2.5 as well.
Yeah.
I think it could have been a lot better than what we got, but that's okay.
That's just the way it is when you read stuff. Sometimes
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good,
they
sometimes it's bad.
they can't all be bangers.
They
So,
can't all. I mean, we just came off of the Song of Achilles. Like
oh my god, that's so
they
true.
can't all be bangers.
um yeah, I it was a little bit of a disappointing read, but we keep on keeping on.
We truckle on.
I don't think we picked a book for August yet.
No, we have not. We need to do that.
Yeah, so we'll do that. And yeah, this was a much shorter episode than last time, but this book was much less emotion inducing, so
Yeah.
comparatively. But yeah, that was book club.
That was book club. Thank you all for listening, for watching, for reading along, whatever you do. Yeah. And we hope you all have a lovely time zone, day, night, evening, midday, whatever it is for you. And we will see you on the next one, my friends.
See you in the next one. Bye bye.
Bye.